And it is another great day on Black Belts and Boardrooms. I love today is Friday. We have two exceptional ladies on our podcast today. It's like they got together and they formed Voltron, and we got something exciting today. Amir, who do we have today?
Bernard, I'm excited today for a couple of reasons, and I'll tell you those two reasons are first for us, at least on the podcast. One is we've never had two guests at the same time, so I'm super excited. The two guests today that we have are exceptional researchers in the field of AI, and that's the second piece of it. We've never really had an episode where we really talked the most time about AI, so I'm excited about having two authors, two researchers. They're both academics, have done some exceptional work with Twitter. And Maggie, I believe you've done work with Twitter, and Numa Dhamani with UT Austin as well. Uh, Numa Dhamani and Maggie Engler, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Appreciate you making time. So, very quickly, I mean, you guys have exceptional careers. You've fought cybersecurity and trolls, Maggie, at Twitter, and that's my understanding and read of it. Numa, you've done some work with misinformation as well. I think that's really exciting. And as you think about your careers going back as children, was this like a thing you wanted to do? I want to be a researcher and fight cybercrime or misinformation. Was that a thing?
Not for me, no. I don't think that was what I had. I actually don't think I really knew what I wanted to do when I was young. I actually studied physics in college, which I think really trained me to kind of think about complex systems and a lot of failure modes. And I think that mindset actually translated very nicely to digital systems. So, kind of how people, algorithms, data, and how all of that interacts. So, my career has kind of really focused on kind of machine learning at the intersection of like trust, safety, and security. I was also at Twitter. Maggie and I used to actually work at Twitter together. So I was in Twitter security. Maggie was in like Twitter health. Sure, she can talk more about
Yeah.
that. But, um, but yeah, it wasn't something that I think I wanted to do when I was 5 years old. But I'm really glad that I fell into the space when I did.
Yeah, very, very similar, but, I definitely did not grow up, really with any sort of, ambitions in technology. The first thing that I wanted to be when I was younger was a farmer, actually. Um, my dad grew up on a farm, so I liked the animals. But I was always good at math and then kind of took that through school. I similarly to Numa, just studied engineering, electrical engineering in my case, and uh, got into data science, machine learning, and cybersecurity almost by accident, and then really started to see um, when I was still in school the impacts that AI was having in cybersecurity. So I worked at a very early malware detection platform, and they had just started kind of this transition from moving away from signature based file detection for certain types of malware to thinking about, okay, can we actually build a system that will detect new malware by determining here are the different characteristics about this file that make it make it bad, and can we learn that? So training a model to do that detection as opposed to the sort of blacklist, whitelist approach before. And ever since then, I've been in that general security area, although like Numa, and as we did overlap throughout our careers later, um, kind of branched out to trust and safety as well. So not only how is the system secure, but how can people take advantage of these systems, or how are users potentially doing things that we don't want to do, even if it's not formally a hack, let's say. And so that's what I worked on at Twitter, and now I've been at Microsoft. I was at a startup in between, but I've been at Microsoft working on the Copilot products, but very similarly trying to understand how do we make the project or the products secure? How do we make them safe? And how do we make sure that the AI is sort of doing what we want it to do.
So, in the way of safety for AI, I mean, you guys indicate that it's a socio-technological problem or socio-technological area, AI. How do you see safety playing a part in that? What does it look like from your perspective as an implementer and builder?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can go quickly and say that I think that when we're talking about safety in AI, it really there's sort of two different mindsets. One is that, oh, this is something that we just need to sort of tack on to make sure that we're not going to get sued or kind of a almost like liability sink. But the the way that I prefer to frame safety is that it's actually part of the value proposition of AI. If we can go to if we're creating an AI system that is going to be working with sensitive company data, for example, we want to be able to say proactively, like, here is what we've built to make sure that that we're not going to expose this data in an unintended way. Here's what we've done in developing this system to limit your risk. So yeah, I think that's kind of like we think of safety as any capability really, in that it's something that you want, and we can sort of train and develop the system to maximize it.
Yeah, I think Maggie covered it really well. I think it's not just about the model, it's kind of the entire system that's around it. So that includes kind of everything from like training data, your model, your interfaces, the humans that use it, the institutions that deploy it. And it comes, I think, from a lot of like layers of safeguards. So that could be like model safeguards, your system design choices, governance, like human oversight. So it's like you don't really just kind of fix safety in the model alone, but you actually try to manage risk kind of across the entire ecosystem there.
So, if we're leading a large organization in a Fortune 500 company, what should we think about on a Monday morning around safety, governance, risk, and compliance?
Well, I think that's a really, really good question. I think that it's, I think right now where we are with AI is that so much governance is like organizational based, right? Because we don't have a lot of regulations in place. They do always tend to lag behind innovation. Um, and even kind of with responsible AI and safety frameworks, there isn't like a general like framework or some sort of like consensus to follow. Um, I think there are a couple like frameworks or templates that you can borrow from. So things like NIST or OECD, but there isn't just anything that, like everyone's following right now. And that's kind of always, I think, been the case with responsible AI and ethics as well. Um, so I think a lot of that is kind of like figuring out like what your risk profile is as an organization. What is it that you like what kind of trade-offs you're willing to make and aren't able to make, and kind of going from there, which I know isn't like a great answer because I'm not like, here's like a list of 10 things to do. But unfortunately, I think a lot of it is just kind of figuring out like where you are as an organization, um, what kind of risks you are willing to take and not willing to take, what your ethics and values are, and kind of going from.
Yeah, I think this is actually so Numa and I um, wrote Introduction to Generative AI together. And one of the things that we wanted to, or that we really wanted to get across is that, first of all, anyone can kind of, anyone who's using AI can evaluate the safety of it and the risk of it with respect to their specific use case. And then it does not take, a whole lot of expertise to do that, at least at a high level. Um, and to Numa's point, I think this is so dependent on the deployment context. So if you are actually, let's say you're a small company or a small, a dev shop, maybe a couple engineers. In that case, it might be enough that you identify, okay, our risk again is that we're going to use coding agents, but um, we don't want our private repository accidentally published anywhere. So in the case of a couple engineers, maybe it's enough that you're just going to develop norms around what you give the agents access to, or kind of a solid understanding across the team of what's acceptable and what's not. Whereas, to your point, Amir, if you're, sitting in the C-suite of a Fortune 500 company, most likely norms are not going to be enough, and you're working with a much bigger organization, much bigger headcount. In that case, you probably get to the scenario of, okay, I should develop internal tooling that actually prohibits external communications of certain types of data. And so I think what is actually the prescription, so to speak, will depend a lot on both the risk tolerance and resources available.
Not That's good information. I'm kind of curious since we're talking about the AI agents, et cetera, in there. Do you feel like far as the coding aspect is going to go away? I work in a dev shop. Most of the people that I work with at my company is 90% dev, and everybody's trying to get to the latest thing, Claude code, et cetera. Do you feel that the coding aspect of what we do now is going to soon, I would not say go away, but slowly get a little bit smaller going further?
Yeah, so I think software engineering is about so much more than just coding, right? I think it includes like system design, it includes architecture, testing, security, debugging, documentation, how we want to maintain like systems over time. And I think coding is just kind of one part of that process. So I think maybe your role as a software engineer starts to look a little bit different, right? So even if AI can generate the code, you still actually need, I think, exceptional software engineers to be able to design your system, to be able to define requirements, review outputs, um, make sure everything actually works in the real world. And I think in a lot of ways that is harder than just writing code, right? I think code reviews, I think, are so much harder than just, writing code from scratch. So
Yeah, I do think I will say I think the coding part is on its last legs. This is maybe controversial, and I think there are probably edge cases where you'll still have, especially maybe if you wanted to do the simplest possible implementation of some particular function, or maybe you need like a formally verified, super secure code. In those cases, we might still see human experts um, write that code. But I think in a lot of cases, as Numa mentioned, software engineers might exist, but they'll be um, really working at the prompt level. I've also seen it compared to the way that people used to write assembly code. And actually, like in university, I don't know if other folks who did CS classes had to like to learn assembly, and we didn't have to do too much with it, but we had to do basic things with it. And I've not used that ever since that class. But so I think it almost is useful to think of it as like then it will just be another level of abstraction that we will up that we'll work at. And so maybe instead of working on in Python or Java, you're working in English, and these agents are actually doing the implementation. That said, again, as Nima mentioned, um, you'll still want to be able to, do certain things around verification. You'll still want to be able to um, develop good testing practices, and so on.
Maggie, you made me feel a little bit old when you talked about assembly language. That was one of the classes I had to go through in college. I had to do COBOL, et cetera. I feel old even saying those. But yeah, I think, when it comes to coding in general, it's good to know some of the history. And I remember doing assembly, and I was like, man, it took me like hours just to get one little thing done doing that. So I definitely understand where you're coming from. I'm curious that we get into, since AI is in the forefront, we get into this thing about people saying that they're experts at AI, because I feel like it's still so young in its stage. It's hard to say that you're experts, but you grow with it. Do you feel that there's a way to have that claim as an expert, or do you feel that everyone's growing along with AI?
Okay.
Maggie, go ahead. Go ahead.
Um, I was just going to say, I think there are experts today in artificial intelligence, but you're absolutely right that um, the sort of artificial intelligence of tomorrow might look a lot different. And so it is something where if you stop using the latest models, for a few months, you're suddenly can feel light years behind. And so I do think I do think expertise exists, and that certainly some of the major principles, as we try to stress as well, are consistent whether you're talking about older versions of AI systems or the newest versions. There are certain um, uh, sort of principles again of evaluation and how the training works, et cetera, that are consistent across generations. But I do think it's absolutely true that there's no one, first of all, no one knows exactly sort of how these systems will advance in the next even year, 5 year period, which is very unusual. And the rate of change has been massive. So it requires a lot of agility.
Yeah, I think to kind of piggyback off what Maggie was saying, I think we definitely still have experts, right? I think especially in like certain areas, like I think in kind of like niche spaces, like especially like safety or security or like large scale system design, kind of like Maggie mentioned, I think it's still moving so quickly that I think everyone's still learning and adapting. So there are people I think with deep expertise, but I think the whole field is still evolving in real time. So a lot of people are kind of growing alongside it. And I think with tooling, that's even more true because everyone's kind of learning as they go. So for some of it, I think the expertise maybe just looks like being good at adapting to new tools and not just like mastering one fixed tech.
Yeah, I actually I think that's a really important point, Numa. And one of the things that we talk about with other trust and safety professionals too, because Numa and I had, as you mentioned, both kind of come from engineering backgrounds, have been working with machine learning for a long time. But a lot of our colleagues in maybe cybersecurity or other trust and safety roles don't use AI. Maybe they're in the social media space or the marketplace, like an Airbnb type platforms. And so AI seems like totally new. But that mindset from a safety perspective of like how can this thing break and like what are the sort of bad outcomes that could happen is actually something that's highly transferable. So we see a lot of
Hmm.
people able to red team AI models and systems who are not experts in AI by any means, but are very good at finding holes and uncovering vulnerabilities as a practice.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's just a lot of those areas are already kind of about like anticipating misuse and thinking about like adversaries and I think really just being able to like design systems that are resilient to failure. And I think that mindset is just so incredibly valuable to AI systems, right? Because a lot of the risks just come from how people interact with technology. So a lot of those people kind of coming from those fields already bring, I think, a lot of really strong skills of like risk analysis and threat modeling and governance, which I think is just so central to being able to build and deploy AI responsibly.
So I'm curious now on the safety piece of this. You've talked about red teaming a little bit, Maggie, and I want to pick on that a little bit. So if I tell you prompt injection, data poisoning, or deepfakes, which one of these will keep you up at night and why?
I think they're all worrisome. I would say that from my perspective, prompt injection probably worries me the most. I think data poisoning is harder to pull off, frankly. And then deepfakes, obviously, we've seen already the proliferation of deepfakes. Actually, this has been another issue that's uh, sort of occurred over the last several years, even before um, ChatGPT and sort of this huge rise of generative AI. And while deepfakes continue to get more and more realistic, I think we are at least in um, a ecosystem where it is known that um, media is not always what it seems. And so, while that certainly poses a very big problem for when it comes to things like verifying, journalistic breakthroughs or really any type of media consumption, I think it's still at least something that people understand very well. Whereas prompt injection is pretty much a vulnerability of every generative AI system today. And I've seen a lot of it also like can impact. And when we talked about coding agents, but any model that's for example, fetching web content is vulnerable to prompt injection, even without the user really knowing that either the model is doing that, like getting web content from somewhere, and certainly not the user might not know what it's exposed to when it comes to injecting the prompt or injecting untrusted content into the prompt. And so for me, I think that's the most. Again, they're all bad, so I don't want to I don't want to sound like the other two are solved because they're certainly not. But I think when it comes to like the generality of the attack and sort of the um, uh, damage that it could cause, that's the one that's most concerning. And we've actually done a little bit of work at Microsoft as well. And I'm sure all of the labs have on thinking about ways to make both the models and systems more robust to prompt injection. But it's hard.
Yeah, I think just to kind of add on that, so I think like Maggie said, I think they're all really bad, so it's hard to just like pick one. So I think it's just hard to pick one, but I think deepfakes are actually really scary because of something called like the liar's dividend, which is essentially like when synthetic media becomes more believable, it doesn't just make it easier to fake things, it also makes it easier for people to deny real evidence. So let's say someone's like caught on video, they can simply just be like, oh, that's AI generated. And now the public doesn't actually know what to trust, right? So I think some of the risk there isn't just misinformation, it's actually just erosion of like shared reality and accountability, where I think both real and fake evidence just become a lot easier to dismiss, which I think is actually pretty scary. And then kind of like what Maggie was saying with prompt injections, it's so unique because of the way it like targets AI systems with tools and external data. So you could have like, an agent read instructions from the internet and then be able to act on them. And you can have like an attacker maybe, hide like malicious prompts in like web pages or emails or documents, and it kind of tricks the system into doing something it shouldn't. So kind of at that point, it's not just like a bad output, it's actually a real world action that it's taking, which could be like leaking data or like executing unintended tasks. And just kind of with how much we're using Gen AI and agents, I think that is really scary because, there are attacks bound to happen.
I think so. Here's a curious question then. Everybody knows about LLMs and these frontier models. What comes after LLMs?
That's a great question. I think, well, to be fair, I think that a lot of the sort of, I guess you'd call it like next generation systems are still going to incorporate language models because LLMs have been so successful in learning representations of, again, language is actually, it turns out, very powerful. And if a model can learn representations of all the different concepts that can be represented in language, it can do a lot, as we've seen from these frontier models, using large language models to kind of reason about, okay, what is it that I should be doing? What are the steps that I should be taking? And then kind of executing those. The other sort of, I guess, thing that we would talk about in this category, and I've started to see a little bit more about this, although I haven't worked with them myself, so I'm hesitant to talk too much about them. But world models, you've started to see. I think Google has released or at least sort of published about world models that they're training, which are designed to simulate, again, like as it sounds like, instead of just languages, like the real world. And so that would be kind of more learning physical space and sort of physics and how things move um, through the world. And another, like that can be useful in things like video, and it can be useful in things like self-driving cars, right? So I think the more or the future of modeling, I guess, or models will be, I think, more multimodal, and still have like language components, but we'll see video, audio, other types of media all combined, and we expect that a lot of gains will be unlocked when a single model kind of learns or can learn these different modalities.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think we kind of saw like how we went from LLMs to like AI agents and systems that can start to take action. I think we're going to start seeing even more integrated AI systems that kind of operate more continuously within organizations and infrastructure. So probably kind of like networks of agents like coordinating with each other. So I think kind of going from like models, agents to more like systems embedded in kind of like real world operations. I know like Maggie talked a little bit about like world models. That is, I think, kind of a relatively like new but really interesting area, which the idea there is kind of instead of just like responding to like prompts or executing tasks, what world models are supposed to do is like give a deeper understanding of like the environment and consequences, which is really interesting. And then there's also um, I've also kind of seen people talk about how like symbolic AI as like a direction that could come back in combination with like modern AI. So the idea there is kind of more of like hybrid systems where you have like large models like kind of handle like language and pattern recognition, and while you have like more symbolic systems handle things like logic and structure and like verifiable reasoning. Um, so so I think there's like a lot of like interesting directions you can kind of see modern AI go in.
No, I like that. I'm curious. This is it's a conversation I have a lot, and it's about AI for good. Everybody sees, everything goes on, but I'm always interested in the AI for good when it comes to, anything around medicine, etc. Numa and Mag, are you looking at anything on that side as far as AI for good? Do you see anything that where AI is really gonna take the lead when it comes for good for the world?
Yeah, this is a fantastic question as well. I so and again, I work more on the general purpose side and safety and security of those systems. So I will say, like, I'm not fully up to speed on all the work that's been happening, but I know that a lot of actually some of the early applications of neural networks or deep neural networks, so things like AlphaFold, have had a lot of impact in precision medicine. So AlphaFold was looking at predicting protein structures and was very successful in that. Um, kind of fast forward, I guess it's probably a decade almost since then, and we've seen certainly medical breakthroughs as a result of learn or like being able to identify those protein structures and in other parts of medicine as well. I know. I think that another area that I'm interested in, I guess AI for good, as you point out, is that I think that there's a lot of just like good basic science contributions that can be made by AI, which have typically compounding effects. So if you think about um, discovery when it comes to like chemistry, that's again sort of has natural applications in pharmaceuticals. When we learn more about biology, let's say, that again, like primarily applications in medicine, but also even just understanding better like how people get certain types of diseases, certain genetic diseases, and so on. So yeah, I think that that's the big area that I would highlight. But I would say that I've seen like some interesting, even from these new large language models, developments kind of across the board in these basic sciences, math, chemistry, physics, that all sort of can be used in applications down the line.
Yeah, I think Maggie covered a lot of kind of the medicine, healthcare, scientific discovery work, which I think is a really promising area for AI. Another one is so I work at iVerify, which is like a cybersecurity company for like threat hunting. So a lot of what my day job looks like is trying to detect things that are really hard for humans to catch. So things like spyware, malware, suspicious behavior on phone, and that I think matters because phones actually have maybe some of the most sensitive data that people have. So I think that in some ways can be also like AI for good, and also just I think generally just kind of working within trust, safety, and security. I think that maybe doesn't often get labeled as AI for good, but I think it is important because without security, the benefits of AI just don't scale safely, right? So I think in a lot of ways, a lot of the work that Maggie's doing and that I've been doing and kind of all of our trust and safety and security professionals have been doing um, is AI for good. And I think just like generally, I think where AI would probably kind of lead the most good is likely where it just kind of augments human expertise at scale. So wherever it's kind of helping doctors and scientists and teachers and public institutions, or really just whoever kind of just do their jobs better as opposed to replacing.
You hit a good point, especially when you said about the security and all that. That is AI for good. You got to have some type of constraints around it. You can't let it just go off and do what it do. So that is very true. A lot of people don't put that far as the governance and the security constraints as AI for good, but it actually is. Without that, you're just asking for chaos for the most part. There's another point around the AI that I've seen as well, where we have about 6% year over year of people not going to college anymore. It's a low number, it's not a big number, but we see that now more people have access to information. So it's less people going to college. Do you see the trend of basically learning on your own using AI as your learning tool instead of going to college? Or does college look like it's gonna look a lot different in the next 5 to 10 years?
But yeah, that's a great point because we also do talk a lot about the democratization of education with AI. I think that so my opinion, and as not an education professional, is that we will still have college. First of all, I totally understand why we're seeing people forego that because it's not the guarantee of the an upwardly mobile career and job that can support a certain type of lifestyle that it once was. I do think education, schooling in general, whether that's like formally college or even just earlier throughout the K through 12 um, years, is like critical thinking and skills that are going to be important in even using AI. So I think that like one of the things that it very well may be possible that people can self teach a lot of disciplines that they would today go to college and get a degree in. But I do think there will be formal processes for again, like when do I, what is a good task for me to outsource to AI? How do I use it effectively? Versus like still these basic pillars of, um, you know, when I see a text, like, can I evaluate this? Can I think critically about it? Can I reason about it? And so I think a lot of the things like the sort of fundamental skills that we teach in school will still need to be taught in school because you do not want to have a generation of folks who are kind of just like using AI blindly. Um, but I do think, and I'm very bullish about even like again self-taught individuals using AI to scale up things that would be have been like impossible to scale before to maybe create some type of business like and then I'm an entrepreneur and I don't necessarily want to go get a bachelor's or master's degree. So I don't know if that totally answers your question, but I think both paths are going to be viable, and probably both will continue to, um, or I guess both options of like I do want to go to college for these specific reasons, or I feel like I can subvert it because I would rather do this, and I already know that that AI among other tools can help me forge an alternate path.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think AI replaces college. I think it maybe changes a little bit of what college looks like, right? So maybe your emphasis on different things. I think it's like college that integrates AI into how people learn. I think I think schools still play a really big role in things like community research. I think it becomes more about like structured learning and mentorship and credentials and kind of developing, like what Maggie was talking about, like critical thinking and judgment, as opposed to just like access to knowledge.
So I want to extend that a little further. There's a lot of people out there who I'm thinking about will build solutions and are building solutions without necessarily the background in education or any other field that they might be engaged in. So they're building on these foundation models already. What are the legal challenges or legal problems that they're not thinking about as they build their solution on the frontier and foundation models? Do you have a perspective, either of you?
Yeah, I think that there's obviously the specific legal considerations are going to be highly dependent on what they're building or what is being built. Um, but in the case of education, for example, like, I think that I guess consider what you might have to do before AI is if you wanted to build an education tool. I think a lot of the work is actually pretty similar because you'd be going out to talking to teachers maybe to try to understand what type of product would be helpful, or maybe that's the kind of cohort that you want to want to replace. And so you're saying, oh, I have this other vision of what I want to build for my new education solution. And in that case, you're still doing a lot of work to define the product and think through like these are the features that I want. Here are the users that I'm going to target. And so AI can certainly help you in that in a way that it didn't before. But I think ultimately for any domain, like in most cases, you're going to need a solid background in the domain, certainly a solid opinion or understanding of the problem you're trying to solve, a way to talk to users or an audience and understand, get feedback. All of those, again, can be AI assisted. But I think that that sort of overall process doesn't change too much. And then when it comes to the legal aspect, again, sort of before and post AI, you may run into certain challenges with education. I'm not as familiar with although actually I guess there would be relevant child safety regulation, for example, if you were targeting like grade school children, which those we've worked with in the past on the general AI product side. But um, if you're building a health solution, again, there's many regulations you'd have to deal with. Finance, like if you're building a financial product, right? Um, there's a lot of different stuff, and uh, what AI does is removes the barrier to, I think, product development, or makes it a lot easier to kind of enter these marketplaces. But all of the regulations still apply, and so I guess maybe this is your point, that people might be going in and entering these spaces without kind of as much familiarity with all of the relevant regulations that might apply to them. And obviously, AI does not change that. And so I think in some cases, and we've seen like legal AI products, for example, but as of now, certainly, we still recommend consulting with a human lawyer for the time being, and probably for the foreseeable future. Only because that is an area where even a small mistake or um, uh, a lack of experience can really impact you.
Yeah, I think Maggie covered that really well. I think a lot of builders maybe kind of just focus on what's technically possible, right? But the legal landscape kind of around like data, harm, privacy, claims about a system, those still apply and those are still just as important. So I think that that is still something that these builders have to be aware of. Like there's still privacy laws, there's consumer protection laws, there's data right, copyright laws. Liability is a really big issue. So it's, I think, kind of taking a step back from, okay, like this was technically possible, I built the solution, but what kind of like legal landscapes or like frameworks do we still have to kind of still kind of apply to? So
Yeah, and actually on this note, just a quick aside that I saw recently we were talking about dev shops earlier, that one of the sort of potential, almost like I guess business models of the future, very well may be sort of like, okay, someone has an AI authored system, or a repo or something like that, who's going to validate that it's compliant with ISO compliant, or who's going to make sure that it's complies with some type of domain specific regulation, because that is something again that still requires an amount of domain human expertise.
I'm thinking with these AI models, we're going to hear more and more people become familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect.
for sure.
Yeah, not enough people are familiar with that. But, I'm just thinking about this conversation and, safety obviously has a lot to do with martial arts too. We talk about self-defense and that very much is safety. What are you seeing today, from a student perspective? Is the student now more fluent in AI? 'Cause I know you both have interactions with students on a regular basis. What are you seeing from students that makes you hopeful about the future and, AI as part of that world?
Yeah. So I actually teach a class on kind of like AI safety and evaluations at UT Austin. And I think and I guess I've been teaching for the past like 2 years or so now, and kind of like seeing the progression. I think the students are, I think, often more fluent in using AI tools, but maybe not fluent in understanding how they work or their limitations. Um, so I think they are, I think, really quick to adapt things like ChatGPT or coding assistants, and I think have like a higher comfort level now with kind of experimenting and being able to integrate them into workflows. But I think kind of some of the deeper knowledge, which is why we have now classes on this at UT and elsewhere, things like kind of model limitations, bias, security risks, and evaluation, I think still requires kind of more structured learning. So I think, maybe we're seeing maybe more like high tool fluency, but maybe like uneven conceptual understanding. And I think that's where like formal education is really beneficial.
Yeah, I couldn't have put that any better. I'll just add that in addition to the younger students who are, I would say, quite AI native and as Numa mentioned, sort of uneven conceptual understanding, but certainly like willing to pop open a chat GPT or a Claude and give it any type of problem in a way that a lot of um, folks of older generations would be more reticent to do. New and I also taught a course together of professionals. There was a continuing education class of all sort of adults with full time jobs. And that was actually a lot of fun because it was folks just trying to understand like, how do I use at a
Mhm.
basic level, use AI in my career that I already have, whether that's marketing or we had a couple different people in various admin roles, an executive, and so I think it's not certainly like the as is the case with so many things. Like the college students, today's undergrads are growing up with this and sort of very able to or just like have the idea to use AI in I think a lot of contexts where it wouldn't come naturally to someone who'd been doing it for 15 years without AI. But even so, like I think even the folks who had were very set in non AI workflows did start to see benefits and realize that okay, like now I understand what this is. Like it's not scary. Like it's doing some things that are helpful. Maybe it's not good at some things, and like some things I need to sort of continue to do myself. But I can use this to automate or to speed up other things as well. So
So if AI safety were a martial art, what would it be?
I feel like I don't know enough about martial arts to make a
I
good
don't either.
a good analogy here, unfortunately.
You
Man, that is a good question though. I even have to think about that. What would it be? I don't want to be biased and say it's jujitsu, but I would say it would be able to adapt to any martial art. I would say that the way it's going.
Being jujitsu. Not that I know enough about martial arts, but isn't that about like anticipating moves and stuff,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
could
that's
see
good.
that, right?
Okay, okay. See a win for jujitsu on here. I
No,
like
no,
that.
no, no, no. We can't have this. Yeah. So I know Renard is more into the grappling arts. I'm more into the striking arts.
I
So
see.
that off the wall question was really just to see, test your martial arts knowledge.
One for me. One for me. That's what we're gonna say. One for me. One for me. Oh, Maggie and Numa, it has been definitely a pleasure having y'all on the podcast. It is definitely a masterclass. I know that the future of AI, especially the younger generation coming up with y'all leading the way, we're gonna be good in that aspect. But I definitely have to ask before you go, we ask everybody what's their theme music, what's the music that gets them ready for the day. So I would love Numa and Maggie. What is your theme music?
So for me, it has to be country. I can go first. So my family's all from Texas. I would say my theme music right now. I'm really liking Ella Langley. So a good kind of classic country with a little spunk.
Okay. Numa, what you got?
I also love country and also live in Texas, but I'm actually gonna go. I've been listening to a lot of Florence and Machine again lately, so I'm gonna go with Dog Days.
Okay. I like both of
Yeah.
them. I like both of them. I like that. I like that. That's 2 good picks, even though y'all both in Texas, 2 different genres, but I love both of them. And again, thank y'all so much for joining us. I will say on the podcast to our listeners, if you don't have the book, you should get the book. We'll make sure to provide that at the end when we get this posted as well, because the first edition, you got the second edition, phenomenal books. And we thank y'all so much. And I will say to our Black Belts and Boardrooms listeners, we will see you on the next one.